What if everything you were told about the Church's greatest enemy was a carefully woven illusion? For centuries, the Vatican has preached that the devil is the embodiment of fear, temptation, and eternal damnation. But what if the true terror was never the devil at all? What if it was Egyptian magic? Yes, the forbidden knowledge Vatican officials hid away in archives. The ancient Egyptian rituals that promised Osiris resurrection, Isis cult devotion, and Horus symbolism long before Christianity existed. The question isn't just why the Vatican feared Egypt, but why it feared it more than hell itself. Think about the paradox. A horned devil is safe for the Church because it keeps people dependent on priests for protection. But Egyptian magic, Heka, the Egyptian word of power, offered tools that let ordinary people shape destiny without intermediaries. That's dangerous. That's why Hidden History Vatican doesn't want you to read in the Egyptian Book of the Dead or in the countless papyri locked away. Magic older than Christianity was more than myth. It was competition, a rival system of salvation the Church could never fully control. This is not just about dusty scrolls or ancient tombs. It's about you. If Egyptian gods versus Christianity was once the battleground, then the echoes still shape your beliefs today. What if the very rituals you thought belonged only to priests, sacraments, or saints were actually borrowed, adapted, or stolen from esoteric Egypt? Forbidden rituals Egypt guarded reveal a truth so unsettling the Vatican chose secrecy over honesty. And if that truth came to light, it could change everything you thought you knew about salvation, magic, and power. So lean in, because in this journey, we're not just talking about history. We're exposing Vatican secrets, forbidden magic, and the dark history Vatican tried to bury. By the end, you'll understand why the Vatican feared Egyptian magic more than the devil, and why those hidden truths might matter more now than ever. What if the true terror haunting the Church was never the devil it carved into its sermons, but a much older force buried beneath the sands of Egypt? Imagine priests in Rome realizing that Egyptian magic carried codes able to bend reality itself, codes too dangerous for the Vatican to dismiss. Vatican secrets whisper of an uncomfortable truth. The devil was controllable within doctrine, but Egyptian magic stood outside their reach, promising liberation of the soul without permission from the Church. And that possibility, souls awakening on their own, was unbearable for an institution built on spiritual monopoly. The hidden history Vatican scribes tried to cover reveals how Egyptian magic, older than Christianity, reached into realms the Church could not silence. Forbidden rituals Egypt guarded for millennia spoke of Osiris resurrection, Isis cult devotion, and Horus symbolism. These weren't just myths to entertain the curious. They were systems of power, rival scriptures, manuals of eternity that carried weight across empires. While the devil remained a creature of fear, Egyptian gods versus Christianity created a battlefield where salvation itself was at stake. Consider the Egyptian Book of the Dead, a collection of incantations designed to navigate the afterlife. Unlike the Church's dependence on divine grace, these texts gave individuals practical tools. Through Heka, the Egyptian word of power, a soul could command spirits, confront demons, and even alter destiny. Vatican archives secrets hint that early Church fathers feared the spread of this knowledge more than heresy. After all, how could they control a world where anyone might access forbidden magic and rewrite the rules of heaven? Picture this: a believer in Rome kneeling before a crucifix, while another across the sea whispers ancient Egyptian rituals under the moon. One depends on a priest for forgiveness. The other holds amulets and chants Heka to bend unseen forces. This clash of magic and religion was never just symbolic. It was a war for the human soul. The Church versus Egypt was a battle of authority. And the Vatican fear of magic had less to do with demons and more with losing control over eternity's keys. Many occult history-explained texts suggest that Egyptian cults promised something Christianity could not fully monopolize: resurrection through knowledge, not obedience. The Osiris resurrection myth revealed that rebirth was achievable through ritual mastery. For the Vatican, this blurred the line between divine miracles and human power. Forbidden knowledge Vatican priests kept locked away served as a reminder that their system was not the only gateway to eternity, and behind closed doors, they trembled at the thought of people discovering it. Think of the symbols carved on ancient temples, ankhs, scarabs, cosmic eyes, each charged with occult symbols, Egypt designed to channel unseen power. To the untrained Ache, these might appear decorative, but to initiates, they were blueprints of transformation. This was the danger. Magic older than Christianity, offering tools that bypassed the church. And while sermons preached the devil versus Egyptian magic, the true fear was never evil. It was competition. Competition that made their authority fragile. And here's the enigma that opens the path forward. If the Vatican's true nightmare wasn't the devil, but the possibility of humanity rising through Egyptian magic, then we must ask, what exactly did the pharaohs, priests, and forbidden sciences know that threatened Rome's throne? In the golden age of the Nile, power wasn't only measured by armies or wealth, but by access to sacred knowledge. Pharaohs weren't just kings, they were living symbols of divine order, guided by priests who mastered astronomy, ritual, and Egyptian magic. Together, they created a civilization where ancient Egyptian rituals aligned heaven and earth, promising prosperity in this life and eternity beyond death. To the Vatican centuries later, this looked like dangerous competition. Why Vatican feared Egypt becomes clearer when you realize these priest-kings wielded science and sorcery hand in hand, something the church could never fully control. These priests studied the stars with precision, mapping constellations and cycles that shaped ritual calendars. While Rome later condemned such practices as astrology or superstition, the Egyptians saw cosmic rhythm as the heartbeat of divinity itself. Hidden history. Vatican scholars avoided reveals that Egyptian magic wasn't guesswork. It was a system grounded in observation, discipline, and belief. They called it Heka, the word of power that bridged spirit and matter. Unlike the devil versus Egyptian magic narrative Rome pushed, this was no devilry. It was knowledge older than Christianity, unapologetically effective. Imagine walking into a temple in Thebes at dawn, seeing incense rising, hymns echoing, and priests invoking Horus symbolism through sacred geometry. Every sound, every movement, every symbol was deliberate. Forbidden rituals Egypt guarded were not chaotic spells, but carefully engineered sciences of transformation. The Vatican fear of magic came not because it was false, but because it worked. And if people believed it worked, the monopoly of salvation Rome promised would start to crumble. Pharaohs carried titles like Lord of the Two Lands, but their true claim was mastery over life and death itself. Through rites passed down generations, they tapped into occult symbols Egypt left inscribed on walls and papyri. Church versus Egypt wasn't about theology. It was about survival of influence. Vatican secrets suggest leaders feared the cult of Isis, Osiris resurrection myths, and rituals that placed eternity in human hands. In truth, it wasn't about the devil, it was about losing control of the most valuable currency, immortality. Think about how even today we rely on science for answers. Medicine, technology, and physics shape our survival. For the Egyptians, sacred science was their version of modern innovation. They didn't separate magic and religion from daily life. They fused them. Forbidden knowledge Vatican archivists suppressed tells us Egyptian priests healed with chants, calculated calendars with stars, and ensured harvests with rituals. To ordinary people, this wasn't superstition. It was proof that the gods walked among them, and that was precisely the threat to Rome's claim of being the sole channel of divine will. When Christianity began to spread, it faced a dilemma. Could it truly outshine a system where priests had promised eternity long before Christ? Magic older than Christianity already had millennia of credibility, carved in stone and practiced in temples across an empire. The hidden truths Vatican feared weren't just myths, they were competitors with stronger roots. Egyptian gods versus Christianity wasn't a fair fight. It was a struggle where the older system already had the loyalty of millions. And so the question remains, if pharaohs and priests commanded forbidden sciences that shaped kingdoms, what happens when we look deeper into the very language they used? Words believed to carry the power to shape reality itself. The Egyptians believed words were not just symbols on papyrus, but living forces capable of shaping destiny. This doctrine, called Heka, the Egyptian word of power, was central to their worldview. To them, speaking a name was to call its essence into existence, to command gods, spirits, or even the forces of death. Vatican secrets suggest This was one of the greatest reasons why Vatican feared Egypt. If humans could wield words like tools of creation, then the Church's monopoly on miracles would collapse. Unlike the devil versus Egyptian magic dichotomy Rome invented, this was no enemy to be tamed, but a rival language of divinity itself. Consider how names worked in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. To pass the gates of the afterlife, the soul had to recite precise words, naming guardians and speaking codes that opened hidden paths. These weren't just prayers, they were passwords to eternity. Hidden history Vatican officials suppressed reveals that Egyptian magic operated more like a technology than superstition, where sound and symbol unlocked cosmic doors. The Church versus Egypt battle was never about superstition. It was about who held the master key to eternity's vault. Think about how words still carry power today. A contract, a declaration of love, or a promise can change lives with a single phrase. Egyptian priests mastered this art thousands of years earlier. Forbidden rituals Egypt guarded allowed them to invoke Isis cult blessings, or even call upon Osiris' resurrection through carefully constructed chants. For the Vatican, this wasn't harmless ritual. It was a rival claim to divine authority. If a man could speak and command fate, what need would he have for a priestly mediator? Imagine the fear in Rome when whispers reached them that Egyptian names could bind gods themselves. Hector taught that to know the secret name of a deity was to command it. Contrast this with Christianity, where only divine grace moved heaven. Vatican archives secrets imply that church fathers saw this as spiritual rebellion, a dangerous independence where mortals could rival divine will. Magic, older than Christianity, grounded in word and symbol, was not simply competing, it was subverting their entire framework of salvation. To make this practical, think about how modern affirmations or mantras work. People repeat phrases to rewire their mindset, to focus energy, to heal. Now amplify that 1,000 times with sacred geometry, ritual timing, and the belief that gods themselves must respond. That was the power of Heka. Occult history explained in fragments suggests that the Vatican fear of magic was rooted in its efficiency. Words were more than sounds, they were bridges between thought and reality. Symbols and names carried weight, whether carved in stone or whispered in secret. Horus symbolism, for instance, was not just an image of a falcon, it was a living archetype, a protective force activated through invocation. Occult symbols, Egypt embedded into daily life, functioned like hidden codes, always accessible to those who knew them. The forbidden knowledge Vatican kept locked away shows that such practices blurred the line between religion and sorcery, leaving Rome powerless to compete without demonizing the system itself. And so, as one looks at the Heka doctrine, another question rises like a shadow. If words themselves could open doors to eternity, what of the mysteries that promised resurrection long before the story of Christ ever reached Rome? Long before the cross became a symbol of salvation, Egypt already told stories of death and rebirth. The Osiris resurrection myth promised eternal life through ritual mastery, not divine grace. In the hidden history, Vatican never wanted the world to dwell on Osiris. Dismembered, reassembled by Isis cult devotion and reborn, embodied a resurrection narrative that predates Christianity by thousands of years. Why Vatican feared Egypt is clearer when we realize this myth offered hope outside the Church's framework. Magic older than Christianity had already solved the riddle of life after death. The Egyptian Book of the Dead contains detailed instructions for this journey. Incantations to navigate darkness, names to command spirits, and rituals to restore the soul's form. These weren't vague metaphors, they were practical steps believed to guarantee passage to eternity. Vatican archives secrets hint that the Church worked hard to suppress these texts because they rivaled the promise of Christ's resurrection. If Osiris' resurrection was accessible through ritual, then divine monopoly shattered. Forbidden rituals Egypt carried in papyri were thus branded dangerous or diabolical. Consider how this would have appeared to early Christians in Rome. On one side, sermons about the devil versus Egyptian magic warned of heresy. On the other, Egyptian priests were showing a system where knowledge itself granted immortality. For ordinary people, one path demanded obedience, while the other offered empowerment. The Vatican fear of magic wasn't about demons, It was about people realizing they didn't need priests to reach eternal life. Esoteric Egypt was a mirror held up to Rome's fragile claim of exclusivity. Think about ISIS cult practices that spread across the Mediterranean. Women and men alike found comfort in rituals of renewal and fertility, promising rebirth in both body and spirit. This devotion was personal, intimate, and accessible. Church versus Egypt was never a fair competition. One side offered a single savior, while the other offered a system of participatory transformation. Hidden truths Vatican records conceal suggest that this accessibility threatened to empty churches faster than persecution ever could. Even Horus symbolism tied into the resurrection theme. As the child of Osiris and Isis, Horus embodied the victory of life over death, the continuation of divine bloodlines. To followers, this was proof that death was not an end, but a doorway. Occult symbols, Egypt etched in stone, reinforced the belief that resurrection was not just possible, but guaranteed for the faithful. Vatican secrets imply that the early church demonized these practices precisely because they worked too well in the imagination of the people. Now think of it practically. If one believes salvation is achieved through ritual and knowledge, then the authority of confession, sacraments, and priesthood becomes optional. That would shake the foundation of any institution. Forbidden knowledge, Vatican vaults still hide points toward this fear, that people might awaken to the possibility of their own godlike renewal. Occult history explained through these parallels makes the rivalry between Osiris' resurrection and Christ's story a battlefield of ideology. And here lies the haunting transition. If the Egyptians already mastered the art of resurrection, what of the tools and objects they used? Amulets, sigils, and ritual devices that carried power strong enough to rival even the sacraments of Rome. Walk into an ancient Egyptian tomb, and you'll find more than stone walls. You'll discover a toolbox for eternity. Scarabs, ankhs, protective spells, and funerary texts were not decorations, they were technologies of the soul. Egyptian magic treated these objects as extensions of Heka, the Egyptian word of power, able to shield, transform, and guide the spirit. Hidden history. Vatican scholars buried tells us these ritual objects mirrored, but also challenged the sacraments of the Church. Why Vatican feared Egypt was not because these items were meaningless, but because they carried meaning too close to its own sacred traditions. Consider the ankh, the cross with a loop at the top. To Egyptians, it symbolized life eternal, resurrection before Christ, and divine power. Now, place it beside the Christian cross. The resemblance is undeniable, and the implications are uncomfortable. Occult symbols Egypt carved into temple walls whispered of immortality long before Christianity. Vatican archives secrets hint that this similarity was a dangerous reminder that magic older than Christianity had already captured the essence of salvation. No wonder the Church pushed the narrative of devil versus Egyptian magic. It was easier to demonize than to compete. Amulets were not only for kings and priests. Ordinary Egyptians wore scarabs to protect themselves, to ensure rebirth, or to invoke Horus symbolism against evil. In contrast, the Church restricted access to holy relics and blessings, keeping salvation centralized. Forbidden rituals Egypt taught that divine power could be worn, carried, and used by anyone. This democratization of the sacred was intolerable for Rome. If every person had their own portable sacrament, what use was a priest to mediate the sacred? The Egyptian Book of the Dead often instructed the use of ritual objects. Specific words inscribed on papyri, placed with the dead, ensured safe passage into the afterlife. This was no different in function from holy water or rosaries, yet it came from esoteric Egypt. Vatican secrets show that the Church feared such parallels. Church versus Egypt was a struggle not just of belief, but of symbols. Whoever controlled the symbols controlled the imagination of millions. And imagination, as history shows, can topple empires. Think of how people today still keep objects for luck or protection, pendants, bracelets, or even photos. These are modern echoes of ancient practices. Forbidden knowledge, Vatican silenced, suggests the Egyptians perfected this system thousands of years ago. Amulets were programmable intentions, infused with prayers, sigils, and Heka. They functioned like spiritual technology. For the Vatican, this blurred the line between faith and magic. making it harder to draw a boundary the Church insisted upon. Even funerary objects reflected a sophistication Rome could not ignore. From Shabti figures meant to serve in the afterlife to jars inscribed with protective formulas, everything had a purpose. Occult history explained in these artifacts reveals a system where ritual objects ensured not only safety, but cosmic authority. For the Vatican, labeling them diabolical was the easiest way to invalidate their power while hiding how similar they were to Christian sacraments. The devil versus Egyptian magic narrative became a shield against uncomfortable comparisons. And here's the intriguing thread. If ritual objects could embody divine power, how much more dangerous was the reality that Egypt's very gods, Isis, Osiris, Horus, would later seep into Rome itself, infiltrating the empire and even brushing against the birth of Christianity. As the Roman Empire expanded, it didn't just conquer lands, it absorbed gods. Temples dedicated to Isis rose in the heart of Rome, while Horus symbolism blended with imperial imagery. For ordinary citizens, the Isis cult offered comfort, healing, and even promises of resurrection through Osiris mysteries. Magic older than Christianity was alive and thriving within the empire that would one day host the Vatican. Why Vatican feared Egypt becomes undeniable here. The gods of the Nile were not defeated, they were assimilated, threatening to outshine the emerging faith of Rome. The hidden history Vatican rarely acknowledges is that Christianity grew in the same soil where Egyptian cults flourished. Followers of Isis gathered in candlelit chambers, whispering forbidden rituals Egypt preserved for centuries, invoking powers that rivaled sacraments. Church versus Egypt was not only theological, it was cultural. Isis and Osiris carried immense popularity among women and common folk, offering roles and participation the Church did not grant. Vatican secrets suggest this was a silent war of attraction, not just ideology. Consider how Isis was often depicted. A mother nursing her divine child, Horus. The resemblance to Mary and the infant Jesus is striking. Esoteric Egypt had already planted imagery that carried deep emotional power. To compete, Christianity mirrored these archetypes, reshaping them into its own narrative. Occult symbols Egypt carved into temples became blueprints, Rome repurposed. The devil versus Egyptian magic narrative, later pushed by the Church, may have been a strategy to erase the uncomfortable resemblance between Egyptian gods versus Christianity. Roman emperors themselves weren't immune. Many joined or tolerated Egyptian cults, fascinated by the allure of eternal life. Horus symbolism appeared in military banners, and Osiris resurrection myths resonated with the idea of rebirth after battle. For the Church, this mingling blurred lines too much. Forbidden knowledge. Vatican archives hide suggests that early Christians fought not only persecution, but also the temptation of Egyptian deities, whose promises seemed equally, if not more, persuasive. Think about how religions today adopt and adapt symbols from one another. Cross-cultural borrowing is common, yet in this case, it was more than borrowing. It was survival. Christianity needed to reframe what Egypt had already established: salvation, resurrection, eternal protection. Hidden truths, Vatican locked away, reveal that to win this war, they had to demonize Egypt's gods, labeling them as false, dangerous, or even demonic. The Church versus Egypt narrative became propaganda to protect authority. The fascinating part is how much of this influence still lingers. Festivals, iconography, even the concept of baptism find echoes in Egyptian ritual washing and initiations. Occult history explained in fragments makes it clear: Egypt didn't vanish. It went underground, woven into Christianity's DNA. Vatican fear of magic was thus also a fear of exposure. What if the people realized their faith carried Egyptian roots? Forbidden knowledge. Vatican clerics suppressed points to this silent inheritance. And so, we arrive at a paradoxical stage. If Rome once embraced Egypt's gods, only to later demonize them, what does that reveal about the true rival? Perhaps the devil was never the problem. The real danger was Egyptian magic itself, a rival system too resilient to erase, leading us to the next question. What happens when Egyptian magic is compared directly to the devil's mask? For centuries, the Church crafted the devil as its ultimate enemy, a horned beast of chaos, temptation, and eternal damnation. Yet behind closed doors, Vatican secrets suggest that this enemy was, in fact, convenient. The devil could be controlled within doctrine, bound to sermons, rituals of exorcism, and the constant reminder that only the church could save you. But Egyptian magic, that was different. Forbidden rituals Egypt preserved offered a rival system of salvation, one where humans didn't need priests or saints, but their own mastery of Heka, the Egyptian word of power. Why Vatican feared Egypt becomes strikingly clear here. It wasn't about evil, but about competition. The devil versus Egyptian magic narrative was built to simplify what could not be explained. When people wore amulets, recited chants from the Egyptian Book of the Dead, or trusted Isis cult practices, they weren't fighting devils. They were accessing ancient occult knowledge. Magic older than Christianity promised control over destiny without submission to church authority. For the Vatican, this was far more dangerous than demons. Demons could be rebuked, but rival gods and living traditions could not be silenced so easily. Imagine the choice of an ordinary believer. On one side, a priest tells him his soul is safe if he obeys and fears the devil. On the other, Egyptian priests show him Horus symbolism and Osiris resurrection as proof that eternity can be won through ritual and knowledge. Which path would feel more empowering? Hidden history. Vatican records avoided reveal that the church had to demonize the Egyptian system, not because it was dark, but because it offered light outside their monopoly. In this way, Egyptian gods versus Christianity was never about good versus evil. It was about access. Esoteric Egypt provided tools that put eternity within reach of anyone willing to learn. Forbidden knowledge Vatican locked away pointed to this uncomfortable reality. The church could tolerate the devil because it was a villain they could manage, but it could not tolerate a rival tradition of empowerment. That was the true fear, the liberation of the soul without Rome. Think of how, even in modern times, people use affirmations, symbols, or meditation to shape their reality. These practices echo the logic of Egyptian Heka. Occult history explained shows that such techniques survived, hidden in whispers and adapted into different religions. For the Vatican, such practices blurred the line between magic and religion, exposing the fragility of its claim to exclusive truth. It was simpler to declare Egyptian rites diabolical than to admit they might work. The devil, after all, was abstract. His existence was tied to faith and fear. Egyptian magic, by contrast, was tangible. Amulets, texts, rituals, and experiences people could see and feel. This materiality made it far more threatening than any horned figure in sermons. Vatican fear of magic was rooted in its visibility, its undeniable presence. Forbidden rituals Egypt carried through centuries stood as living proof that salvation could be engineered, not only granted. And so we arrive at an uncomfortable question. If the devil was just a mask, a convenient enemy, then what did the church do with those who practiced Egypt's forbidden knowledge? What secret trials, condemnations, and silenced histories lie buried in the Vatican archives, waiting to be uncovered? History often speaks loudly about witch hunts and heresies, yet whispers softer when it comes to Egypt. Hidden history. Vatican scribes tried to erase suggests that countless papyri or amulets and ritual texts were confiscated, sealed away in underground chambers. Vatican archive secrets hint that some of these objects still lie in vaults, guarded as if they carried fire too dangerous to touch. Why Vatican feared Egypt becomes clearer when you see how much effort was spent not just condemning the practice, but burying every trace of it. The church labeled Egyptian magic as blasphemy, even though much of it mirrored its own rituals. Imagine the paradox: holy water and anointing oils on one side, ritual libations and sacred ointments on the other. Both promised purification, both carried symbolic power, yet only one was allowed. Church versus Egypt wasn't fought in open battle. It was waged in libraries, monasteries, and secret tribunals where forbidden rituals Egypt had preserved were quietly silenced. Consider the trials where scrolls were burned, not because they were meaningless, but because they worked too well in the minds of the people. Esoteric Egypt had encoded eternity into texts like the Egyptian Book of the Dead, where Heka, the Egyptian word of power, guided souls beyond death. For the Vatican, releasing such knowledge would fracture its monopoly. So these scrolls became contraband, locked in vaults, Occult history explained in fragments suggests that suppression was as important to the church as preaching. Even scholars weren't safe. Those who dared to study Egyptian gods versus Christianity risked excommunication, ridicule, or worse. Forbidden knowledge Vatican authorities guarded meant that to explore Osiris' resurrection or Isis cult rites was to invite condemnation. Some were accused of trafficking with the devil, though their only crime was curiosity. The devil versus Egyptian magic accusation became a weapon of control, a way to blur lines until people feared even asking questions. Think of how knowledge is still censored today, books banned, voices silenced, archives sealed. The strategy is timeless. Control information, control belief. Vatican fear of magic was rooted in its potential to democratize eternity. If anyone could access Horus symbolism or protective amulets without clerical approval, the church's power would shrink. So trials became theater, designed to terrify others into obedience while quietly hiding the real treasures underground. There are even stories, half rumor, half testimony, of hidden vaults beneath Rome filled with Egyptian relics, scarabs, papyri, ritual knives, perhaps even entire sections of the Book of the Dead. Forbidden rituals Egypt encoded in these objects were deemed too dangerous to destroy, yet too subversive to release. Vatican hidden truths suggest that secrecy itself became the new form of condemnation. Better to keep the relics chained in darkness than risk them awakening in light. And here lies the haunting bridge to our next mystery. If suppressing Egyptian knowledge was so crucial, what happened to those who still dared to practice it? What were the consequences of unlocking these forbidden doors, even when the price was madness, persecution, or worse? Every power comes with a cost, and Egyptian magic was no exception. Hidden history. Vatican tried to bury suggests that those who dared to practice forbidden rituals Egypt preserved often faced trials far more terrifying than any sermon about hell. Some were branded heretics, others condemned as sorcerers, their lives ending in fire or exile. But the fear didn't stop there. The real consequence, the one whispered about in Vatican archives' secrets, was the razor-thin line between illumination and destruction. Magic older than Christianity could elevate the soul, or consume it. Consider the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Its passages promised safe passage through the underworld, but only if the words were spoken with precision. A misstep meant eternal wandering. The Vatican fear of magic grew not just from rivalry, but from the genuine risks these rites carried. Even initiates of Isis cults whispered about madness, striking those unprepared. Church versus Egypt was not just ideology, it was survival. The Vatican saw these dangers and used them as proof. Egyptian gods versus Christianity led only to ruin. Yet in reality, they were masking fear of losing control. Think about it like fire. In the right hands, it warms, cooks, and protects. In the wrong hands, it destroys everything. Egyptian Heka, the word of power, was that fire. Some initiates reported visions of Osiris' resurrection so overwhelming they blurred the line between revelation and insanity. Occult history explained, suggests these experiences were similar to modern encounters with altered states of consciousness. Vatican secrets likely exaggerated the dangers, but they couldn't deny the undeniable. This magic worked, and that was what terrified them. Those who sought hidden truths, Vatican sealed away, often paid with their reputations, if not their lives. Scholars accused of heresy, mystics locked away, or ordinary people persecuted for carrying a scarab or amulet. The devil versus Egyptian magic accusation became a convenient hammer. Label someone a servant of the devil, and no one asked whether they were simply practicing esoteric Egypt traditions. The cost of unlocking the forbidden was social exile, spiritual terror, and often death. Yet the allure never disappeared. Imagine living in a world where the church preached damnation, while whispers promised you could command destiny itself. Some risked it all, hiding rituals in cellars, passing knowledge in coded texts, believing the rewards outweighed the risks. Forbidden knowledge Vatican feared most was not destruction, but empowerment. For those brave enough, the forbidden was not a curse but a key. Still, keys can open doors best left closed. Even today, there are stories of those who try to revive ancient Egyptian rituals, seeking the same promises of power, protection, or rebirth. Some speak of visions, others of nightmares. Perhaps the dangers are psychological, or perhaps they are as real as the priests once warned. Occult symbols Egypt left behind still hum with mystery, daring seekers to test their strength. And the Vatican's centuries-old fear lingers. What if someone, somewhere, truly unlocks it? Which brings us to the ultimate reflection. If the consequences of forbidden rites were madness and persecution, what does that reveal about the Church's true enemy? Was it ever the devil, or was it the possibility that humanity might awaken its own godlike power? An idea that still echoes in the final veil of this story. What if the Church's greatest enemy was never the devil at all? Hidden history. Vatican archives conceal points us toward a darker suspicion. The true terror was that humanity might discover its own godlike potential. Egyptian magic, with its forbidden rituals and Heka, the Egyptian word of power, offered exactly that. Magic older than Christianity whispered that resurrection, protection, and transformation were not gifts handed down by priests, but tools any soul could claim. Why Vatican feared Egypt more than hell itself becomes clearer here. It wasn't about evil, but about liberation. Osiris' resurrection stood as proof that life after death could be achieved through ritual knowledge. Isis cult devotion revealed the strength of love and renewal beyond mortality. Horus symbolism embodied victory over chaos. Together, these myths formed a system of salvation outside Rome's control. Vatican secrets hint that the devil versus Egyptian magic narrative was built as camouflage, hiding the more terrifying possibility. Egyptian gods versus Christianity was not superstition. It was competition, and it was winning hearts long before Rome rose. Imagine for a moment that the true devil, for the Vatican, was not a horned figure, but the idea that people might awaken to their own inner power. Occult symbols Egypt carved into stone became mirrors of a dangerous truth. If mortals could command reality, the authority of the Church crumbled. Forbidden knowledge Vatican authorities suppressed makes it clear. The fear was not demons, but independence. Magic and religion blurred, threatening the monopoly of salvation. Think of how this applies even now. People turn to meditation, affirmations, or rituals outside organized faiths, seeking direct connection to the divine. These modern practices echo esoteric Egypt, showing that the hunger for empowerment never died. The Vatican fear of magic was a recognition that humanity would always seek shortcuts to eternity, even when threatened with fire and damnation. Forbidden rituals Egypt preserved through whispers prove that the pursuit of freedom is timeless. The dark history Vatican rarely confesses is that much of its own symbolism, rites, and imagery carry echoes of Egypt. From baptismal waters to resurrection themes, traces of the Nile linger beneath the cross. Occult history explained in fragments shows that suppression never fully erased these influences. Instead, they were absorbed, hidden in plain sight. The line between Church versus Egypt blurred so much that the very enemy Rome feared became part of its identity. And so we stand before a paradox. Was the devil truly the enemy, or just a mask crafted to distract from the real threat? Forbidden knowledge Vatican vaults still protect might answer that question, but perhaps the answer is already clear. The Church needed an external monster to keep control, while the real danger was always internal, awakening. Egyptian magic threatened to make every human their own priest, their own savior, their own god, which leaves us with the haunting question. If the Vatican once feared Egyptian magic more than the devil, do they still fear it today? And if those secrets were ever released, what power would humanity unlock beyond the veil that has hidden truth for centuries? So now you've seen it. The hidden history Vatican archives tried to silence, the forbidden rituals Egypt carried across millennia, the echoes of Osiris' resurrection and Isis cult devotion that shook Rome's foundations. The truth is unsettling. The devil was never the true enemy. The real fear was Egyptian magic, Heka, the Egyptian word of power, that gave ordinary people the keys to eternity without permission from priests. Magic older than Christianity promised freedom, and that freedom was too dangerous for the Vatican to allow. But here's the question only you can answer. What will you do with this knowledge? Will you let it pass as an intriguing story? Or will you start looking at symbols, myths, and even your own beliefs with new eyes? Imagine how your life could change if you stopped waiting for permission to access wisdom and instead sought the power hidden in history. Do you feel the paradox that the devil versus Egyptian magic narrative was never about good and evil, but about control and liberation? What if the same patterns of suppression are happening right now in ways you haven't noticed? The past is not as far away as we think. It lives in rituals, traditions, and even in the doubts we carry. So I'll leave you with this. What if humanity's greatest chains are not demons, but the stories we've been told about who holds the power? And if that's true, what could happen if you decided to unlock your own hidden power rather than fear it? If this message struck something inside you, then it's time to keep digging deeper. Subscribe to the channel, activate the notifications, and join a community that seeks truth beyond the veil, because only those who dare to question will ever discover the forbidden knowledge Vatican still fears today.